if I were to answer that using an endocrinological framework, I would say, in a sense, your question can be reframed as the difference between dopamine and serotonin, right? The dopamine hits caters to my pleasure center. So the porn or the juicy burger is a one-time hit, but that's not existential bliss, right? That's not right. So, but when I sit down and I say, I am genuinely a happy person. I've got a great family. I love my children. I've got great friends. I can text Dave Rubin in a second. He's going to respond. I read books all day. I am existentially happy. So I think it's really the difference between short-term hits of dopamine and long-term serotonin contentment, which, by the way, is something that we can also relate when you're choosing your partner, right? Many people will confuse, lust and the hormones, the neuroanatomy of lust. That's going to fade. I don't care whether you're married to a Greek god Adonis or Beyonce. There's the old expression, show me a gorgeous woman and I'll show you a guy who's tired of having sex with her.
Yeah.
Well, that also speaks to the reality that there is a huge tedium that sets in if all you are pursuing is short-term pleasure. But on the other hand, for me to be able to go for a walk with my wife and have fun and joke around and so on, that's contentment. So that's, I think, the difference between them.
Let's talk about, since we've mentioned Jordan a couple times, one of
Sure.
the things that he talks a lot about that I think has helped a lot of people is that your goal shouldn't be happiness, your goal should be purpose. First off, I sense you agree with that, but can you explain how do you meld those things? And what do you see as the difference of those things?
Yeah, so in the last chapter of my forthcoming happiness book, I have a quote by Viktor Frankl, where he basically says, don't pursue directly success. It is something that comes as a consequence. And I use that because I argue that I completely analogize that to happiness, and hence I agree with Jordan. Happiness should be something that results from you having adopted the right mindsets, the right decisions. And so I think you mentioned purpose and meaning. So in one of the chapters where I talk about the two decisions that are most likely to impart either great amount of misery or great amount of happiness to you, I say that the choice of spouse that you choose and the choice of profession that you choose are the ones that are going to do that, either make you more miserable or happier. And to Jordan's point about purpose, I wake up every day, with sort of a gleeful, I'm rubbing my hands together in anticipation because my job brings me great purpose and meaning. Today, I'm going to talk with Dave Rubin. Later, I'm going to meet a graduate student. Then I'm going to speak to a college in Florida. Then I'm going to put up a Saad Truth. I'm constantly in creative mode. So that's actually something I talk about in the book, that the surest way to find purpose and meaning, irrespective of which profession you follow, is to instantiate your creative impulse. Now, that's a very broad statement because I could be a chef and be creative. I could be an architect. I could be a stand-up comic creating new material. I could be a podcaster. I could be an author and a professor. But all other things equal, if you immerse yourself in the creative impulse, you're more likely to find purpose and meaning. Very few insurance adjusters probably wake up and say, thank God I'm an insurance adjuster. I find such purpose and meaning doing that.
So what do you do for that person? So for the person that's an insurance adjuster that's watching this right now, that it's a mundane activity, let's say. They might have the great spouse, they might be making a decent living, but the day-to-day thing, and I'm sure there are some insurance adjusters who absolutely freaking love it, but whatever that job is, that whatever we're talking about there, what do you say to that person?
Yeah, fantastic. So
who's
there
pulling the levers all day?
That's right. So in a sense, it relates to some of the other prescriptions that I have in the book. So I argue, for example, that I have a whole chapter titled Life as a Playground, right? Meaning that immerse yourself in endless play, even when pursuing very serious things. So science, the pursuit of science, is the ultimate form of intellectual play, right? Because when you're putting together, I'm going to come to the insurance adjuster in a second. When you're putting together a puzzle of a 1,000-piece puzzle, you're trying to make all these pieces fit. Well, that's what science is, right? There's a bunch of variables out there, and I'm trying to find which one causes which other one, which one correlates to the other or is unrelated to the other. So it's a form of orgiastic cerebral play. So to the insurance adjuster, I say that perhaps your job doesn't allow you that creative play pursuit, but then at night, when you finish your job, rather than watching television for the next 5 hours, maybe sign up for that ceramics class that you had always wanted to take. In other words, there is still a way for me to pursue my creative impulse, to immerse myself in play, even though my profession doesn't afford me those opportunities.
What would you say to the person that's struggling? And I think this is probably mostly for the generation or the several generations now behind the two of us, who are struggling between the balance between pleasure and happiness. Meaning they've grown up where you can watch porn all day long, you can play video games all day long, you can indulge in whatever it is that you like to do all day long, basically at your phone, as opposed to getting to the purpose that'll bring you the happiness. And right, I think a huge amount of people are struggling with that balance.
So if I were to answer that using an endocrinological framework, I would say, in a sense, your question can be reframed as the difference between dopamine and serotonin, right? The dopamine hits caters to my pleasure center. So the porn or the juicy burger is a one-time hit, but that's not existential bliss, right? That's not right. So, but when I sit down and I say, I am genuinely a happy person. I've got a great family. I love my children. I've got great friends. I can text Dave Rubin in a second. He's going to respond. I read books all day. I am existentially happy. So I think it's really the difference between short-term hits of dopamine and long-term serotonin contentment, which, by the way, is something that we can also relate when you're choosing your partner, right? Many people will confuse, lust and the hormones, the neuroanatomy of lust. That's going to fade. I don't care whether you're married to a Greek god Adonis or Beyonce. There's the old expression, show me a gorgeous woman and I'll show you a guy who's tired of having sex with her. Yeah. Well, that also speaks to the reality that there is a huge tedium that sets in if all you are pursuing is short-term pleasure. But on the other hand, for me to be able to go for a walk with my wife and have fun and joke around and so on, that's contentment. So that's, I think, the difference between the two.
Do you think a lot of people don't know what they want in a spouse, partly for what you're saying, that they're just looking for either the sexiest person or whatever, that they just have no idea what their actual, what the lanes are, what the barriers are? So, for example, did you see the story just in the last week or so about Jonah Hill sending these texts to his girlfriend? Did you happen to see this story? Yeah,
I did.
So he sent out what I thought were fairly well-said, controlled statements about what his expectations in a relationship were. Don't party with your girlfriends. Don't send out naked pictures, like some basic stuff. And then he said, hey, if this doesn't work for you, I'm not the right guy. Now, of course, everyone calls him a misogynist and all the press is going after him. But I thought, how impressive. There's someone actually saying what they want.
Yes.
And not apologizing for it.
So two things I'll say. So you probably know the Delphic maxim, which is know thyself. So that speaks to your point, right? Because he knows what's going to be his trajectory of happiness. And he's saying, this is what I expect. And that could only happen if I know myself. But if I'm going to put the more general point in a scientific framework, there are two, when it comes to the evolutionary mechanisms of human mating, there are two competing if you like, maxims. There is the birds of a feather flock together, and there is the opposites attract. Well, it may interest your audience to know that the overwhelming consensus in the scientific literature for long-term happiness of a union is birds of a feather flock together.
Oh, interesting. I would have said it the other way. Wow.
No. I'll tell you where you might be right. If you said the excitement of a short-term dalliance, right? Let's go behind the shed and let's have some, dopamine hits, metaphorically speaking. Then if I am someone who is restrained, who's sexually shy, who's introverted, and you're the opposite, you bring me out of my shell, those things, those opposites might attract, and I might actually come away a lot more enriched by the fact that we're different. But for long-term union, if we share values, if we share life goals, if we share belief systems, it's astoundingly more likely that we'll be happy. So what Jonah Hill was doing was being a perfect Darwinian being and recognizing that he wants someone who shares his values. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. I wonder if in some ways there's sort of like a big picture, little picture version of that, because I always find, like, if I was to look at me and David, for example, we really agree on all the big picture stuff of what we've wanted out of life and built things together. And that's why, thankfully it knock on wood, it's worked and it's growing and all that. But we're very different in another, we're opposites when it comes to attention to detail, organization, all of those things. So I guess there's probably a couple different layers of all of those things.
That's why when I was referring to birds of a feather flock together, I specifically said what those criteria are that we should match on. We're not trying to match on our eye color. We're not trying to match on the morphology of our faces. It's life goals, it's life mindsets, it's belief systems. That's what we're talking about, birds of a feather flock together. Incidentally, on physicality, by the way, there is one trait that we also have assortative mating, and that's on height. So that if you look at naturally occurring couples, I'm talking now heterosexual couples, but we could easily extend it to same-sex couples. There was a study that was done with 720 actual couples, one out of 720, did it violate the assortative cue of male should be taller than female. So that's a very important cue. The only true.
Well, this doesn't bode well for, say, Ben Shapiro. If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about academia, check out our Academia playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.